Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're wading into waters that I think, if we're being totally honest with ourselves, most of us spend a significant amount of mental energy trying to actively ignore.
Oh, absolutely.
It's the one bill nobody wants to talk about, nobody wants to think about, and certainly nobody wants to budget for until it's literally due.
It is the ultimate elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
But this is an elephant that comes with a very, very steep invoice attached to its trunk.
Exactly. We're talking about end-of-life expenses,
Yeah.
funeral planning, and look, before you hit pause or, skip to the next deep dive thinking this is going to be too morbid or way too heavy for your commute, I want you to stick with us.
Please do.
Because what we're diving into today, the stack of research, this guide we've pulled apart, it's actually, it's surprisingly empowering.
I agree completely. It's really about flipping the script.
Yeah.
It's about taking something that feels like this shadowy monster in the closet and, just turning it into another checklist.
Right.
It's about taking something scary and turning it into something, manageable.
I mean, think about it this way. We spend years planning for weddings. We have Pinterest boards, we have spreadsheets, we visit venues.
I have spreadsheets.
We stress about college funds before our kids are even out of diapers. We have 401ks for retirement and we check the stock market. We obsess over these milestones. But this one particular event, which is guaranteed to happen to literally 100% of us.
There's no statistical outlier here.
No, it gets zero airtime in our daily conversations. It's considered superstitious or just plain awkward.
It's the taboo nature of it. And that avoidance, it creates a very specific, very difficult problem. Because when we avoid the topic, we aren't avoiding the reality.
Not at all.
We're just deferring the decision-making process to the absolute worst possible moment.
Right. The source material we're looking at today paints this vivid, really stressful picture of families being forced to make these high-stakes financial decisions. We're talking thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars.
In a matter of days.
Within days. And they're doing it while they're grieving, while they're in shock, and often with zero preparation.
It creates a total pressure cooker environment. You have stress, you have confusion, you have this unexpected financial strain. And then you layer all of that on top of the profound loss of a loved one.
Yeah.
It is a recipe for conflict, for debt, and frankly, for regret.
So to help us navigate this, we are doing a deep dive into a text titled The Financial Compass for Honoring Life and Navigating Loss. And I have to say, I love that title.
It's good.
Because it implies direction. When you're in that fog of grief, you don't need platitudes, you need a compass.
You do. And the core text, it really serves as a guide to destigmatize this whole process. It acts as a stabilizer in a storm.
So what is our mission today? What are we trying to achieve by looking at this?
The goal really is to reframe funeral budgeting.
Right.
We need to stop seeing it as this fearful anticipation of death. Like if we talk about it, we're somehow inviting it in.
Right, like you're jinxing it.
Exactly. Instead, the source argues we should see it as an act of care. It's a way to protect the people you love.
I like that. It's not about being morbid, it's about protection. It's a shield you build for your family.
Precisely. The core thesis here, and it's a powerful one, is that proactive budgeting transforms a moment of crisis into a moment of clarity.
A moment of crisis into a moment of clarity. I like that. That's the vibe we are going for. So here's our roadmap for the hour. First, we're going to look at why these costs catch us so completely off guard. Why are we so bad at this?
Why the blank spot?
Exactly. Why are we so illiterate when it comes to this specific market? Then we're going to do something that might feel a little uncomfortable, but is, I think, necessary. We're going to break down the actual bill.
We're going to open the envelope.
We're opening the envelope. We're going to look at the line items. What are you actually paying for? Then we'll get into the psychology of spending while grieving, which is, it's fascinating and a little scary.
It's very scary.
And finally, we will arm you with actionable strategies to save money and, quite frankly, save your sanity.
It's a comprehensive look at a topic that, it usually just stays in the shadows.
So let's jump into section 1, the perfect storm. Why are we so unprepared? I want to pause on this because it frustrates me. I can tell you roughly what a gallon of milk costs.
Sure.
I can tell you what a decent used car costs. I know the difference between a Honda Civic and a Ferrari. But if you asked me right now, what is a reasonable price for a funeral? I have no number in my head.
No frame of reference.
None. Is it 5,000, 20,000, 50? Why are we so illiterate about this one specific purchase?
It's a great question. And the source material, it actually defines this phenomenon. It calls it the zero exposure factor. And it's pretty much unique to this industry.
Zero exposure factor.
Okay.
Okay.
Think about the real estate market.
Oh.
Even if you aren't actively buying a house, you see for sale signs everywhere. You hear friends complaining about their mortgage rates. You watch HGTV.
Right. You have a passive absorption of market value just by existing in society. I know that a mansion costs more than a shack.
Exactly. You have a ballpark. But with the funeral industry, that passive absorption is completely non-existent. There is no Zillow for caskets.
Haha. Yeah.
You don't browse urns on a lazy Sunday afternoon. You don't have friends coming over for dinner bragging about the great deal they just got on a burial plot.
God, could you imagine? Honey, come check out the lining on this one. It's exquisite.
Right. It just doesn't happen. It's socially invisible. And because of that, the very first time 99% of people see a price tag is when they're sitting across the desk from a funeral director, usually within 24 hours of a loved one dying.
Which is the worst possible negotiating position you could ever be in.
It's beyond that.
You're emotionally compromised, you're exhausted, and you have this ticking clock.
It's not just a bad position. It's a blind position. You have no baseline. If the director says this package is $12,000, you don't know if that's a bargain or a complete ripoff. You have nothing to compare it to.
Absolutely nothing.
And the source makes a really fascinating comparison here to the wedding industry.
Because weddings are also incredibly expensive, but we handle them so differently.
Completely differently. With a wedding, you have a runway. You have months, sometimes years to plan. You compare florists. You taste test cakes. You negotiate with venues.
You have time to think. You can say, hey, maybe we'll DIY the centerpieces to save a little money.
Precisely. You have agency. You have time for consumer behavior. But with the funeral,
the runway is non-existent.
it's gone. Decisions happen in this incredibly short window of time, often just a few days. You are trying to learn an entire industry's pricing structure in 48 hours while you are likely the most emotional you have ever been.
You can't say, you know what, let me sleep on it. Let me think about it for 6 months.
It's not an option. It has to be decided now.
That is the definition of a disadvantage. And it's not just that we don't know the prices. The source points out that the options themselves have exploded, right? It used to be simpler.
That's the paradox of choice, as the text calls it. In the past, maybe you had one, maybe two local funeral homes in your town.
Right.
Everyone went there. Everyone did pretty much the same traditional service. Viewing on Tuesday, service on Wednesday, burial at the local cemetery.
Yeah.
That was it.
Now.
The source details how funerals can be traditional, modern, religious, secular, green burials, alkaline hydrolysis, which is water-based cremation,
Whoa, okay.
direct cremation, celebration of life at a brewery, a memorial service on Zoom. The list goes on and on.
Which, I mean, that sounds great in theory. Choice is usually a good thing. We like options. We like customization.
Choice is empowering, yes.
Yeah.
But the source points out that without guidance, this flexibility leads to total confusion. If you don't know what is required by law versus what is optional, you might assume certain services are mandatory when you're not. You freeze up.
You get paralyzed, like, oh, I have to do this because that's just what you do, or I have to do this because that's what we did for grandma 20 years ago, so it must be the rule.
Exactly. And because there are so many options, so many variables, families often just default to what they think is expected rather than what they actually want, or more importantly, what they can afford. They're paralyzed by the variety, so they just say yes to whatever is suggested.
And then looming over all of this is the big one, the cultural aspect. The societal avoidance.
This is a huge factor.
Yeah.
The source highlights that even people who are incredibly financially responsible, people who budget for everything else, who balance their checkbooks down to the penny.
The hyper-organized people.
Yes, they avoid this. It's the one line item they consciously leave off the spreadsheet.
Because it just feels... It feels like if you put it on the spreadsheet, you're admitting mortality. You're admitting that the party eventually ends.
And that's a hard thing to face. But the source makes a very harsh, but I think very necessary point. Avoidance doesn't make the cost go away.
No, it just hides it. It buries it, no pun intended.
No. And worse, it transfers the burden. You are taking that financial weight and you are dropping it onto your loved ones at the exact moment they are least equipped to manage it.
That's a heavy realization. By not dealing with it, you aren't saving anyone from anything.
No.
You're just ensuring that someone else has to deal with it when they are at their absolute lowest.
Precisely. You are outsourcing the stress to your grieving family. You're making them guess what you would have wanted and then pay for that guess with money they might not have access to immediately. It's a terrible situation to put someone in.
Okay, let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's move to Section 2 and actually demystify the bill. Because I think for a lot of us, we have this vague idea that funerals are expensive, but we don't know what that actually means.
Right. It's just a big, scary number.
Yeah, we don't know the anatomy of the invoice. So let's do a simulation. Let's pretend we are the Smith family. We're sitting in the arrangement office. The funeral director slides a piece of paper across the mahogany desk. What are we looking at?
It really helps to break it down into categories, which the source does very well. The first category, and usually the first thing on the list, is called professional services.
Okay. What does that include? Is that just like the profit margin for the business?
It's often listed as the basic service fee. And this is a really critical concept to understand because unlike almost everything else on that list, this one is non-negotiable.
Why? I can negotiate a car dealership's destination fee or whatever. Why can't I negotiate them?
Because of the Federal Trade Commission, actually. The FTC funeral rule allows funeral homes to charge a single, non-declinable fee that covers the overhead of the business.
Ah, okay.
This is the cost to keep the lights on, to maintain the license, to have staff available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year to answer the phone when a death occurs.
So this is kind of like the cover charge. It's the cost of access to their services?
In a way, yes. And the key insight from the source here is that this fee is generally unavoidable. It varies by provider. It could be $1,500 at one place and $3,500 at another down the street. But you can't say, hey, I don't want to pay for your overhead.
Got it.
It covers all the administrative tasks, securing permits, filing the death certificate, coordinating with doctors and cemeteries. It's a lot of background work.
Okay, so that's the baseline. You walk in the door, you're paying that fee.
Right.
Now, let's talk about the next category, which I think is where a lot of people get confused, and frankly, where the most money is often spent on, well, misunderstandings, care of the deceased.
Right. This involves the physical preparation. Okay. So transporting the body to the funeral home, often called the first call or removal,
Right.
refrigeration, and the big one, embalming.
Okay, look, we have to talk about embalming because in my head, and I bet for a lot of listeners, this feels like the one non-negotiable. It's a hygiene thing, right? It's a legal requirement. You can't just not do it.
See, that right there, that belief, that is the single most expensive misconception in the entire funeral industry.
Really?
The source hits this really, really hard. Embalming is almost never required by law.
Wait, get out of here. I thought it was a public safety issue. I thought you had to do it to, prevent disease or something.
That's the common narrative, and it's a very powerful one. But if we look at the actual regulations, and the source references the FTC funeral rule here, there is no federal law requiring it. Most states only require it in very specific, rare scenarios.
Like what?
Like if the body is being transported across state lines via a common carrier like an airplane,
Yeah.
or if there's going to be a public viewing that's delayed by more than a certain number of days and refrigeration isn't available.
Right.
For the vast majority of cases, it's a choice.
So if I just want a closed casket service or a direct cremation or even an immediate burial.
Then it is strictly a cosmetic procedure. It's a method of temporary preservation, not a method of sanitation. It delays natural decomposition to allow for a viewing. That's its purpose. But here is where it gets tricky. A funeral home can have a policy requiring it for public viewings. That is their right as a business to set that policy.
Okay.
But what they cannot do is tell you it is the law if it isn't. They have to disclose that it's their policy, not a legal requirement.
That feels like a very, very thin line that could be easily blurred when you're talking to a grieving family.
It is. And the source suggests that families often spend anywhere from $700 to $1,200 on this service simply because they didn't ask the magic question, is this mandatory? They just assumed it was.
That is huge. That's a mortgage payment right there, spent on a simple assumption.
Exactly. And knowing that it's a choice rather than a requirement completely changes the conversation. If a family chooses it because they want an open casket viewing to say goodbye, that's a valid, meaningful purchase for them.
Of course.
But if they choose it because they think the government requires it, that is money spent on a lie.
Right. That knowledge gap we talked about earlier is incredibly expensive.
It is. It's literally the cost of not knowing the rules of the game.
Okay, moving down the invoice. Category 3, ceremony and venue. This is the event planning part of it all.
Yes. This includes things like the use of the chapel for the service, the viewing rooms or visitation rooms, The staff support during the event, sound systems, display easels for photos. It's the rent for the space and the labor for the event itself.
And the source mentions offsite logistics, too. This is something I wouldn't have thought of.
Right, so if you decide to hold the service at a church or a community hall, you might think you're saving money because you aren't paying for the funeral home's chapel.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But the funeral home may still charge a fee for staff services for a ceremony elsewhere. And they'll definitely charge transport fees to get the casket, the flowers, and the staff to that location and back.
So you have to watch out for those transfer costs. You're paying for the hearse, the flower van, the lead car for the procession.
Exactly. It's a full logistical operation, and that have a cost associated with it.
Okay, now let's talk about the stuff, the actual merchandise. Category 4, this is where I feel like the sales aspect really, really kicks in.
This is definitely the category of variable cost that swings the wildest. We're talking caskets, urns, burial vaults, stationery, prayer cards, thank you notes.
The casket seems like the big ticket item here, and this is where the visual pressure is just so intense.
It is. And the source insight here is fascinating. It says families often overestimate the necessity of high-end options. You walk into a showroom, or these days you look at a digital showroom on a big screen, and you see the lineup.
Right.
The bronze, the copper, the mahogany, the cherry wood, and then way down at the end of the list, you see the cloth-covered particle board.
And you don't want to be the person who picks the particle board for your mom.
No. Psychologically, we tend to equate the quality of the wood or the thickness of the metal with how much we love the person. We think, I can't put Dad in the cheaper box. I loved him more than that.
It's an emotional purchase, not a practical one.
Exactly. But the source urges us to distinguish between what is meaningful and what is just customary. Does buying the $5,000 mahogany casket with the velvet interior actually honor the person more than a simple dignified pine one? Or are we just doing it because we feel like we should?
That's the question to ask.
Exactly. And there's a technical detail here the source brings up regarding sealer or gasketed caskets.
Oh, I've heard of this. The ones that are supposed to protect the body from the elements.
Right. They are sold as protective caskets, and they have a rubber gasket like a refrigerator door. It implies they keep everything out. But the source is very clear. Nothing stops the natural process forever.
So it's not actually preserving anything long term.
No. The gasket might keep water and other elements out for a little while, but it often adds hundreds, sometimes over $1,000 to the price. The real question is, does that feature provide emotional comfort to the living? If the answer is yes, then it might be a worthwhile purchase for you. But if you're buying it because you think it physically stops decomposition forever, you're mistaken.
That is a very tough reality check to have in that moment.
It is. And that leads us right into category 5, which the source calls the hidden extras.
Ah, the death by 1,000 cuts.
Precisely. These are the costs that happen outside the funeral home, but they often end up on the final tally, or they come directly out of your pocket right away. These are things the funeral director might call cash advances.
Okay, give us some examples.
Obituary notices.
Oh, I don't even think of that as a cost. Do you have to pay for those? I thought the newspaper just, I don't know, printed them as a public service.
Oh, no. It's advertising space. It's real estate.
Yeah.
And often they are charged by the line or even by the inch in the newspaper. A long, beautiful tribute in a major metro newspaper can easily cost hundreds, sometimes over $1,000.
Wow. By the inch. That is cynical but practical, I guess, from their perspective.
It's the media business. Then you have flowers. A large casket spray can be $500.
Easily.
Catering for the reception. Printed materials like custom programs. Transportation for family members. Sometimes you have to pay for police escorts for the procession. That costs money.
I never would have thought of that.
And certified copies of the death certificate. Those are maybe $10 to $25 a pop, but you might need 10 or 15 of them for banks, insurance, Social Security.
And that adds up fast. Suddenly you have an extra $2,000 in expenses you didn't even account for. Now, we have to address the two main paths here, burial versus cremation. The source breaks down the costs for both pretty clearly.
And it's so important to know that neither one is inherently cheap. They just have completely different cost structures.
Okay, break that down for us, because I think everyone just assumes cremation is the budget option, full stop.
It generally is lower cost, but it is not free. With burial, first you have the plot itself, which is literally buying a piece of real estate. That could be thousands of dollars. Then you have the fee for opening and closing the grave.
Oh, which is just digging the hole and filling it back in.
Right. And I always forget that digging a hole costs money. But it does. Often over $1,000 just for the labor and equipment.
That's incredible.
Then in most cases, you're required to buy a vault or a grave liner.
Okay, what is that? Is that different from the casket?
Yes. Most cemeteries require you to put the casket inside a concrete or metal box in the ground. And its purpose is not for the body. It's to keep the ground from sinking over time so the cemetery lawnmower doesn't create ruts.
So I'm paying $1,000 for the cemetery's landscaping maintenance, essentially.
Essentially, yes. And then you have the headstone, which is its own entire industry with its own costs.
Right.
Now, with cremation, you avoid the plot and the grave liner, usually. But you still have the crematory fees, you need to purchase an urn, and you often still have a memorial service, which has all the same venue and staffing costs we talked about before.
So you can't just assume cremation is $500 and you're done. There can be a lot more to it.
No. And the key takeaway from the source is that neither option is inherently more respectful or more dignified than the other. Both have specific and significant financial considerations. You have to weigh them based on your family's values and your budget, not just on an assumption.
It's all very logical when we're sitting here talking about it in a studio. But when you are in the middle of it, logic just goes out the window.
It does.
And that brings us to section 3, the psychology of grief spending. This feels like the most dangerous part of the entire process. This is where the budget completely breaks.
This is where what the source calls the guilt premium comes into play.
I love that term, the guilt premium. It sounds like a credit card perk you definitely do not want.
It describes the impulse to overspend, to alleviate feelings of guilt, or to somehow prove devotion. The source explains how grief literally impairs our decision-making. Your brain is not functioning at full capacity for logical analysis.
Let's get into the neuroscience of that a bit. The source mentions things like decision fatigue.
Right. When you are in a state of shock or acute grief, your prefrontal cortex, that's the part of your brain responsible for logic, for math, for long-term planning, is inhibited. It's suppressed.
It's offline.
It's essentially offline.
Yeah.
You're operating on pure emotion and cortisol. Your fight-or-flight system is activated. You physically cannot process the financial difference between a $2,000 casket and a $5,000 casket in the same way you would if you were buying a sofa.
So you can see the numbers, but you can't really process the long-term implication of that $3,000 difference.
Exactly. The value judgment part of your brain is fuzzy, and this is where the guilt premium kicks in with a vengeance. You're standing in that showroom, you're looking at the basic pine box, and right next to it is the premium mahogany. And your brain whispers, if I loved her this much, I should be willing to spend this much.
It equates the price tag with your love, your net worth with their self-worth.
Precisely. And the industry marketing, whether it's intentional or just by design, it really relies on that internal monologue. It relies on the fact that you don't want to look cheap in front of your Aunt Susan who came in from out of town.
Right. The social pressure is immense. But the source has this quote that I absolutely love. I highlighted it 3 times. It says, "Dignity is conveyed through thoughtfulness, not price tags."
It is such a crucial distinction. Price tag is just a number. It's arbitrary.
Yeah.
Thoughtfulness is an action.
That's right.
You can have a profoundly dignified, beautiful, meaningful service that costs very little. Maybe it's a potluck in a park where everyone shares funny stories. And you can have a very expensive service that feels cold and impersonal. One is not better than the other because of cost.
But the consequences of falling into this guilt premium trap are so real. It's not just about spending money you have in the bank.
No. The financial impact is often debt. The source shares these heartbreaking stories of families taking on high-interest loans, maxing out credit cards, or completely draining savings that were meant for a child's education or for a surviving spouse's retirement. It creates this terrible domino effect of financial instability for the living.
And then there's the emotional impact, which might be even worse.
This is the part people don't anticipate at all. Disagreements over spending can create these massive, sometimes permanent, family tensions.
I could see that.
If one sibling wants the deluxe package and expects the estate to pay for it, but the other sibling knows there isn't enough money in the estate and they'll have to pay out of pocket, that creates a huge rift.
And that rift doesn't just disappear after the funeral is over, does it?
No, that guilt or resentment can linger for years. You spend all of Mom's money on a casket she wouldn't have even wanted. That is a fight that ruins Thanksgiving for the next decade.
And the ultimate irony is, The source points out that this financial stress completely overshadows the actual purpose of the funeral.
Right. You spend the whole funeral worrying about the bill rather than honoring the life. You are sitting in the pew thinking about the credit card statement that's coming instead of actually listening to the eulogy.
And you lose the one chance you have to grieve and remember as a community.
You do. That is a tragedy in itself.
So we have established the problem. We're unprepared, the costs are complex and often hidden, and our brains are actively working against us. Now, let's pivot to the solution. Section 4, the financial compass. How do we fix this? How do we navigate these waters without sinking the family ship?
It has to start with mindset.
Mm.
We have to reframe the entire conversation.
The source calls it reframing budgeting as an act of care.
Yes. And this is how you get over the awkwardness of bringing it up.
Yeah.
You don't say, hey, Mom, let's sit down and talk about your death.
Right.
That shuts people down immediately.
Of course.
You say, Mom, I was thinking about things. I want to make sure that when the time comes, things are as easy as possible for everyone. I want this to be easier for you.
That is a beautiful script. I want this to be easier for you. It's not about death, it's about reducing stress.
It completely shifts the focus from a fear of dying to an act of love for the living. It makes the conversation approachable. It frames the planning not as some morbid obsession, but as a final, thoughtful gift to your family.
So once we have the mindset right, what are the practical strategies? The source lists a few really concrete ones.
Strategy 1 is dedicated savings. And the source really emphasizes this doesn't have to mean complex financial instruments.
Uh-huh.
You don't need a trust fund lawyer for this first step.
So not a whole estate plan, just a savings account.
Just a dedicated savings account. A payable on death, or POD account, is a fantastic tool for this. You have a regular savings account, you name a beneficiary, and when you die, they can get access to that money almost immediately with just a death certificate.
And it bypasses probate.
It bypasses probate, which is huge,
Yeah.
because probate can take months, even years.
And the funeral home wants to be paid in, what, 30 days?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So having that liquidity is absolutely crucial. And you can start small, start early. The key is that having it in a separate account prevents the funds from being accidentally absorbed into general spending.
Right, so you don't accidentally spend the funeral money on a vacation or a car repair because it was just sitting in your general checking account.
Exactly. It provides clarity and intention. Even if it doesn't cover the whole cost in the end, having some money set aside reduces the panic. It gives the family a buffer.
Okay, that makes sense. Strategy 2, documentation of wishes. This sounds simple, but why does just writing it down save so much money?
Because ambiguity is incredibly expensive. If the family doesn't know what you wanted, they will almost always default to the safest, which usually means the most expensive option to avoid feeling guilty later.
So if I write down on a piece of paper, I want a simple cremation and for my ashes to be scattered at the beach, my family isn't going to go out and buy a $5,000 casket just in case.
Exactly. If they know you preferred a simple, informal gathering, they won't spend thousands on a formal service out of uncertainty. It removes the guesswork and it removes the guilt spending. But here's the crucial catch. Do not just put this document in your will.
Why not? That seems like the logical place for it.
Because wills are often read weeks after the funeral has already taken place. It's too late.
Oh.
You need to write it down, make copies, and give those copies to your executor, your spouse, your kids now.
And tell them where the original is.
And tell them where it is, not a safe deposit box that gets sealed upon death.
Another pro tip. Okay, strategy 3, price transparency. This is about being a smart consumer in a field where we're not used to being consumers.
Yes. The source reminds us that funeral providers are businesses, and in the United States, they are required by the FTC to provide itemized price lists.
The general price list, or GPL.
Right. This is your secret weapon. The actionable advice here is to request these ahead of time. You can often get them online now, or you could just walk into a few local funeral homes and ask for one before a death occurs.
So you can compare options when you're not crying.
Precisely.
Yeah.
You can sit at your kitchen table with a cup of coffee and compare them line by line. Ask questions when you aren't emotionally compromised. As the source says, knowledge reduces vulnerability. If you know the basic service fee is $2,000 at place A and $4,000 at place B, that's a huge piece of data to have.
Huge. And strategy 4 is pre-planning. The source mentions this, but with a pretty big caveat.
Yeah, so pre-planning or pre-need arrangements involve locking in prices and services with a specific provider today. This can be great because it freezes the cost at today's rates. We know inflation is real. Funeral costs rise every year. Locking it in can save thousands.
But the caveat?
The caveat is crucial. You need to understand transferability and funding. What happens if you move?
Right. If I buy a prepaid plan in New York and then I retire to Florida.
Exactly. Does the plan go with you? Is the money held in a trust that can be transferred to another funeral home? Or is it an insurance policy that's restricted to that specific funeral home brand or chain? You absolutely have to read the fine print.
And the source also mentions something about community collaboration as a strategy.
It does, sharing costs. In many cultures and communities, this is standard practice. Crowdfunding has become more common now, too. The key is open communication, so if people are contributing, they know what they are contributing towards.
Okay, we are moving into the final stretch here. Section 5. Avoiding pitfalls and finding modern meaning. What are the rookie mistakes that families make in the heat of the moment?
Well, the biggest one, and we've hit this a few times, is equating high cost with respect. We just have to break that link in our brains. It's the most expensive mistake you can make.
Mistake number 2, according to the source, is the package deal.
The bundle trap. Funeral homes often bundle services into tiered packages. Gold, silver, bronze.
Like a cable TV subscription.
Exactly. And just like with cable TV, you might end up paying for 100 channels you never ever watch. You might pay for memorial cards and a registered book and a DVD tribute that you don't actually want just because it was included in the silver package.
So the advice is, be annoying, be picky.
Be a diligent consumer. Ask for the itemized price list. You have the right to buy services a la carte. Customize the service to what you actually want and need. Don't default to a bundle that has unnecessary fluff just because it feels easier in the moment to say, I'll just take the silver package.
And mistake number 3 is simply rushing.
Yes. Decisions that are made quickly without a pause usually exceed the budget. The source says to take a time out. Even taking an hour to go get coffee and discuss it as a family, away from the funeral director, can save you thousands of dollars.
Step out of the sales environment to make the decision.
Exactly. Give yourself a moment to breathe and think.
So, if we strip away the excess, if we avoid these pitfalls, how do we keep the meaning? The source has a great section on meaning without excess.
This is really the inspiring part of the whole text. The focus should always be on personalization, not extravagance.
Okay, so give us some examples of what that actually looks like.
It can be as simple as thoughtfully written programs that tell a story, a slideshow of curated photos, not just random ones, a playlist of their favorite music, having an open mic for people to share stories. These things cost almost nothing, but they resonate so much more than a bronze casket.
It's the stories that people remember, not the flower arrangement.
Exactly. And the source brings up digital options, too, which are huge now. Online memorials, digital guest books, and digital programs can reduce printing costs, which can be surprisingly high.
That's a great point.
Plus, they expand the reach to friends and family who can't travel.
A Zoom link for the service allows people from all over the world to participate who otherwise couldn't, and it costs $0.
It creates accessibility and community in a way that wasn't possible before. It makes a memorial more inclusive.
This has been surprisingly relieving to talk about. It really does feel like we just turned the lights on in a scary room.
It brings it out of the shadows and into the light. It domesticates the fear.
I like that. Let's recap. We went from the shock of the bill, that zero exposure problem, to actually understanding the line items, the basics, the myth of embalming, the merchandise. We looked at how our own brains can trick us with the guilt premium.
And we didn't stop there.
No, we landed on clear strategies. Document your wishes, save a little bit in a dedicated account, and never be afraid to ask for the price list.
The key theme for me from all of this is that budgeting and planning, they empower families to honor a life intentionally rather than reactively.
Intentionally rather than reactively. That is the goal right there. That's it.
And my final takeaway from the source is really this. Preparedness is a gift. It's a true act of love. It allows the grieving family to focus on connection and healing rather than on logistics and debt.
I love the closing thought from the text. It says, preparedness is not a limitation. It is a gift one that speaks long after words fail.
It really is. It's the last thing you can do for the people you love.
So here is my challenge to you, the listener. Start the conversation. It doesn't have to be some big formal family meeting with binders and everything. Just drop a comment. Mention this deep dive. Say, hey, I heard this interesting thing about funeral planning today and it made me think.
Start small.
Just start small, but start today.
Your future self, and definitely your family, will thank you for it.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We will see you next time.